What's up everyone, it's Bones here. In today's video, I'll be making an updated combo and deck profile for my tier Despia deck that I showcased on the channel in one of the previous replays at a commenter's request. Hopefully a subscriber. I'll say subscriber instead for good faith, but before I begin, if you could happen to click on those thumbs up and subscribe buttons, it would be greatly appreciated, as it goes a long way in supporting the channel and shows me that you like content like this. So the first play that I want to show that you can do with the deck, which is kind of where I wanted to build around the deck, as one problem the Patchwork Despia version had previously was not always having enough good discards without having to run multiple copies of cards that may clog. And Tearlaments changed that, and I'll show how. So I'm going to start by activating the branded opening, and I'm going to pitch the Shaylin, special summoning the Aluber, and then doing Chainlink 1 Aluber, Chainlink 2 Shaylin. Now keep in mind that you'll want to do this in draw phase, still to play around draw even if it's not a popular hand trap. But there's things like Valor too. I just happened to let this thing go to M1 while speaking, but you'll see that I'm going to use the Aluber as Chainlink 1 here, should be draw phase, then Shaylin as Chainlink 2, and I'm going to use the Shaylin to go into the queue with the Aluber and the Shaylin. So from here we'll make the queue, and then I'll add the branded fusion, which will allow me to then use the branded fusion in main phase 1 and go into Lubellion. And now we're going to pitch the Hoffinus, or rather the other tier that you haven't used besides Rhinoheart, to go into the Lubellion. And now you can use the Lubellion as Chainlink 1 and the Hoffinus as Chainlink 2. In order to fuse away your Q and your Hoffinus to go into Dragos Depelia, and then per usual the Lubellion will go into the Mirror Jade with itself and Albaz. So because I feel like this lays down the groundwork for the deck, I'm now going to move to simpler combos where you may draw different sides of the deck. So now for the second one, I'm going to show back to back what you would do with Kit Kalos access with good RNG and bad RNG, so that you can see both sides of things to further understand how you want to build your board from there. But you'll see that I'm going to start by using the instant fusion, going into Kit Kalos. From there I'm going to use the Kit Kalos effect and add the Rhinoheart to your hand. Don't send it to the graveyard to play around Crow. And then you're going to use the Kit Kalos effect, special summoning the Rhinoheart and sending itself. From there you can use the Rhinoheart Chainlink 1, Kit Kalos Chainlink 2. So this is basically what you would do with regular tiers, except as you saw in this hand, we're going to hit the one of Tragedy and a tier. So you'll see that we're going to go into the Dragos Depelia, and we're going to go into the Aluber here, in which if you didn't have Called by the Grave or a way to stop hand traps, and this got impermed or valored or something happens, as long as it's not Gamma, now this is where you would go into your Redoer, which is how you get to that kind of end board. But usually what you want to see here is you want to see the Aluber obviously get its effect, get the branded fusion, fuse away here into Lubellion using Albion or Albaz and Ad Libitum, and from there you can discard a card, go into Mirror Jade, banish the Aluber here, and from there you'll set the branded in red in the end phase, and you can or don't have to set the Called by the Grave. But the way I see it is I do think that you should set the Called by the Grave. It's not only a strong interruption, but without Called by the Grave, your branded in red can die to Crow, and with Called by the Grave, you play around Ash, so it's going to be one or the other regardless. That being said, I do feel like getting crowed is the more punishing play because you keep the called by in hand, and that leaves your only disruption to be Dragos Despia, depending on what's in your hand. So now you're going to see the bad RNG side of it, and this is where the deck can vary as well, because your hand is not always going to be 3 Dark Rulers and Called by the Grave. And again, you're going to see this is just Kick Kalos access, and getting the Rhino Heart, using its effect, then special summoning the Rhino Heart, sending the Kick Kalos, use Rhino Heart Chainlink 1, Kick Kalos Chainlink 2, you mill 5, not really hitting anything here, but you do get the Shaylin effect, in which then you fuse away here into Dragos Despia, and at this point, how you play your hand entirely depends on what you have, because say you have Shaylin and Tragedy in hand, that gets you another body along with Aluber access potentially. And say you just have Shaylin by itself with another monster, that if you're using its effect, it's either going to be a duplicate hand trap, which in that case you would go into Redoer unless you hit a tier monster that you didn't use with Rhino Heart, in which then you'd probably go into your Kaleido Heart if able. It just really depends on what you mill and what you have in hand, which is why I can't give you a clearer picture than this. But in the next section of the video, I'm going to do something that I haven't done before, and this is because I want to provide the best results that I could to show how this deck plays in a full game that kind of goes back and forth. So on to the next portion of the video. If you find this helpful, please let me know down below in the comment section so I can continue doing it. But instead of going for a random replay, I wanted to do a mirror match between both decks with me as the pilots to kind of show my thought process of everything I would do if I had access to the perfect counters along with the starters, along with showing you how the deck kind of grinds and how it plays as turns play out. So as you can see, this hand does die to Ash, but the opponent shouldn't know that, and because they shouldn't know that, I'm not going to Ash because the correct play is not to Ash. If they hit a Branded Fusion, or if they open a Branded Fusion, and you Ash the Shaylin, then you're not doing anything with that Ash. There's just too many things that they can open to play around the Ash that doesn't make Ashing Shaylin right. So you'll see I'm going to hit the Hoffiness and the Tragedy here, as I'm going to chain the DD Crow to banish the Hoffiness, and then from there I'm going to add the Aluber. And I'm going to use the Aluber's effect here, allowing it, because now you have two options. If you're to Ash here, then you can go into Redoer. But if they don't Ash here and you get the Branded Fusion, then you can lock them out of anything but Fusion Summoning, along with going through their resources, even if it means them having the Tragedy to recur that Branded Fusion, because at the end of the day, Tragedy could just get back Branded Opening, get Aluber, and so on. So we'll see that I'm going to draw Hoffiness here, and I'm going to use the Shaylin, discarding or sending the Tragedy, then using the Tragedy's effect, getting Aluber, use Aluber, normal summon that, and with the same ideology I'm going to allow that, and then use the Ash on the Branded Fusion here. And because I have the Tragedy in my graveyard to get back the Branded Fusion, it's actually better not to crash here so that you don't get OTK'd by random Branded Fusion shenanigans. So we'll get on to my draw here, and it's going to be Despian Comedy. I'm going to use the Tragedy here, getting back the Branded Fusion, and then I'm going to use the Branded Fusion again, and this time I'm sending Albaz and Hoffiness, go into the Lubellion, and now I have both engines online with Mirror Jade and Kick Kalos on board now, as I'm going to summon the Mirror Jade, use the Kikalos effect, which will get me into my Rhino Heart. And as you can see here, because I don't have the OTK regardless of whatever I do, I'm not going to go for the more aggressive play here, and I'm going to make Kaleido Heart with the Shaylin, the Kikalos, and the Rhino Heart, and then use the Kikalos to shuffle back, or the Kaleido Heart to shuffle back the Shaylin. And I didn't use the Hoffinus there because at that point you kind of don't want to waste it, and you're not going to die here. Because if you get into a situation like this where you draw Shaylin, and along with the Dark Ruler No More, which could be something entirely different, that's another reason why I kind of didn't want to use the Hoffinus there. But that's just to point that out. So you'll see that we're actually going to get the Shaylin, and I'm going to bait the Crow here with the Tragedy to get back the Branded Fusion, and now use the Dark Ruler No More, stopping the board, then use the Shaylin, sending the Hoffinus, and then milling 3, in which Hoffinus can use its effect, go into Kikalos, and take a similar line as the play before. We're not sending Rhino Heart to the graveyard, so we can play around Crow. And we're going to use the Kikalos now, sending the Rhino Heart. Rhino Heart can then send the Shaylin to the graveyard as I mill 5 here, hit the snow. Shaylin gets its effect since we already used Hoffinus. And now we're going to go into the Kaleido Heart, which will shuffle back the Mirror Jade, chain the Mirror Jade, and then chain the Comedy to make sure that our Mirror Jade is in the graveyard. And this is the advantage of going first here, as just the setup of the follow-up is very important. As you see, we get the Branded in red. And then I'm going to use the Branded in red, getting back the Ad Libitum, going into Masquerade here, in which then I can use the Ad Libitum, go into Mirror Jade, go into Battle Phase, banish the Kaleido Heart, in which this case I allowed that in order to special summon back the Aluber and stop the Masquerade. And now I can go into Snow here, which, again, regardless to what I did, I'm going to use the Crossout to banish my own Snow and force the rest of the banishes in order to stop the flip effect, which is why it really didn't matter what happened here. So, as you can see, I'm going to attack with the Kaleido Heart, attack with the Mirror Jade for game. Now, onto the deck profile, and from the previous one, you'll see that I went down to 1 Tragedy, so don't expect it to be an often thing where you actually do mill your Tragedy, but I replaced it with the Instant Fusion because I just felt like Instant Fusion and Foolish are too good in a deck playing Tears, keeping the 1 Branded in red and the 1 Albaz. And another thing I've done is I'm testing the Millenniumize. I know that playing 1 Instant Fusion without the King of the Swamps for the Millenniumize may not seem worth it, but at the same time, the reason I structured this video the way I did it is because you can end up playing both Tier Despia, you can end up playing Despia, or you can play Tears. And having the Millenniumize as somewhat of a second Called by the Grave off the Instant Fusion when you happen to draw a hand that is just better with the Despia stuff can be worth it, since you can always just use the Branded Fusion, send a Tier monster, and then fuse away the Millenniumize into Dragostapelia with the Tier monster that you use. So as you can see, the points of the Q, the Mask, and the Restrict aren't just their regular uses, but also different ways to get into your Dragostapelia, which is kind of funny to see only 1, but at the end of the day, you're only playing 7 Tiers, and Lubellion can also shuffle this back with an Albaz to get into the Mirror Jade, so that's why there's only 1 Dragostapelia. As to explain some of the other stuff, like the 3 Alubers and not playing the Merleys, so I wanted this deck to be Despia and its playstyle Despia. I feel like if you're going to play the Merleys and you're going to heavily invest in the tier package, it's probably better off to let the Alubers entirely but that changes the structure of how the deck plays because it becomes a little bit more RNG dependent. Because you want to hit your King of the Swamps, you want to hit your Shaddolls and stuff like that, and that's what I didn't want. The reason why the 3 Alubers are here is because I wanted to get Branded Fusion more, along with having the 3 field spell here in order to grab your tiers. The ability to make Dragos Despia and Mirror Jade more consistently is extremely appealing when you consider the fact that you can also open Asher Crow or Dark Ruler, the space that you have for going second cards now. Since you're playing the tiers, you can cut a lot of the stuff that was clogging, like multiple Branded and Reds, multiple Albaz, multiple Tragedies, just things that were holding the deck back before that I think the tiers supplement Despia very well with, which is why I don't think that this is a variant of Despia tier that should be taken lightly necessarily, because at the end of the day, Dragos Despia puts in work against Bright, being able to lower their level down to 1, and Mirror Jade being removal. Having the ability to get Branded in red and then go into Guardian Chimera on your opponent's turn is just also something valuable to Despia that I felt was good enough to stay this format if you wanted to go about the deck this way. Because another thing that I have to point out about the more pure tier builds, I've seen less and less builds playing as many hand traps as I saw earlier, and it's because they want the mills to be better. And that's exactly why I mentioned what I did about the 3 Alubers. As you saw, Branded Opening plus a tier gets you there, as well as Branded Opening plus Tragedy, of course. You can just end up sending the tier off of the Branded Fusion and go the same as you saw in the first combo. So now on to the card by card. There's 3 Alubers, 3 openings, 3 Branded Fusion, and 3 of the tier field spell for your starters. Then you have the 3 cross out and the called by for hand traps. Branded Opening can also be a way to play around hand traps, but 3 Dark Rulers, 3 Ash, the Instant Fusion, which can also be another way to play around hand traps. 3 Crows, the Foolish, which can be another way to play around hand traps. The 3 Hoffiness. This, as you saw in the replay, because you're not playing a heavier tier build, you don't want to shotgun it off every time, because it'll end up being just an extra body on board that does nothing. So it's better to let your hand play out as is, and then as you play through your opponent's board, when they activate something and you have the chance to open this after thinning your deck a little bit, I do think it's better to play that way, especially since it can also bait out hand traps. And there's the 3 Shaylins, the 1 Tragedy, the 1 Adlib, the 1 Rhino Heart, the 1 Albaz, the 1 Snow, and the 1 Comedy. These are ways to play around hand traps as well, which makes this deck feel a lot more resilient than it was with the Fright for Patrick. So onto the extra deck, and I've been thinking of cutting the Underworld Goddess. I understand that the powers like monsters are still a thing, but sometimes I feel like I would like to try and find a better solution, because in a lot of matchups you're just not using this. That being said, it is the one consistent out to towers like monsters, so that's why it's here. And another reason why Fusion Dragon is not here is because tiers have to shuffle themselves back into the graveyard when they use their fusion effect. So you can't go into the Fusion Dragon with a tier monster, and the only way that you can really do it here is Albion if you have 2 dark monsters on the field, or really awkward stuff like that. So that explains Underworld Goddess. And then there's the Redoer. It lets you have something when you get hand trapped and just have 2 level 4s. Can trigger your tier monsters. Not much to say about Redoer, except it being a great card in my opinion. Then there's the Dragos Depelia, the Guardian Chimera, the Brigand I wanted to keep in this deck, and I understand if you put Alba Lonatus here, I don't think it's a bad option either, but the ability to special summon Albaz during the end phase is something that is really underrated in my opinion. It just lets you play through more hand traps and more disruptions, while also being something that you can kind of back up branded fusion. Say you went through your tragedy, you already used your tier effects, you just need something that's Albaz plus something generic. Then I feel like the level 8 here with Adlib what makes it the most suitable, but I understand if you would want to cut it for Alba or something else. Then there's the 1Q and the 1 Masquerade. I don't think that running 2 Masquerade is correct right now. There's no poly in the main deck, the side deck for that matter. You're not spamming with fusion spells as much as Despia Patchwork. So you kind of just want to use Masquerade here as a clincher rather than a win condition. Then there's the Lubellion, the 2 Albions, the 2 Mirror Jades, the 1 Kikalos, which it could be 2 Kikalos if you don't want to play the Millennium Eyes. I understand that entirely, but it's just you have to look at the fact that you play 6 Despia monsters with the 1 Albaz, then you have the 3 openings, the 3 branded fusions, and then you have 7 tier monsters with 3 of the field spells, so it kind of cuts down to the middle on what you can see, and it's extremely realistic that your hand could be better suited to play Despia than tier, but you just make the Millennium Eyes instead. Now, on to the side deck. I'm not playing the Artemis Slay right now because Mystic Mine is still legal. And there's the 3 Droplets, which lets you play around hand traps by sending stuff like Aluber or Rhino Heart to the graveyard if you have to, in order to resolve their effects. And there's the 3 Twin Twisters, the 3 D-Barriers, which could be, there can be only 1 or something along those lines. Maybe Gozen. I wanted something more universal. And then to go over the last 3 in specific, the Pankratops I feel is good just because you can special summon this against Blight, run over the Toad, then in battle phase pop the Elf, and the Elf won't be able to revive the Toad. And against tier Despia, you're either tier branded. You either force a branded opening in the graveyard or you just out one of their fusion monsters, the possibility of attacking over another. So I don't think Pankratops is too bad right now. And the HFD and the Red Reboot, because the deck still does need some back row hate, and pairing the Twin Twisters with the Reboot and the Duster help best in this build because blowout cards, and it's something that the deck doesn't have too much of, as you can see, but here in the side deck, there's definitely a lot of cards that can just outright win you the games. Anyways, that's all for today's video. If you have any thoughts, questions, or anything like that, feel free to leave them down below. Let me know if this helped. I don't know how the replay will be taken by you guys, and I don't know if it's the right thing to do moving forward. It's still something I wanted to try. Anyways, if you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching. It's Bones.